On the 8th of May, 1945, World War II in Europe came to an end, just a couple of days before Adolf Hitler ended his life by committing suicide in his Berlin bunker. He and his wife Eva Braun took their own lives rather than be captured by the Soviet army. As the Soviets were closing in on the Berlin from the east and the U.S. Army from the west, some of the Nazi leadership were already making their plans to escape and began to go into hiding, seeking shelter and refuge where they could. Most of them fled via the so-called ratlines, a system of escape routes for Nazis fleeing Europe. Most of these routes led to South America, more in particular Argentina via Spain or Italy. One of the Nazis using this escape route was Josef Mengele. Mengele was the notorious SS doctor at Auschwitz who was fascinated with genetics. This, which led him to wonder if he could somehow modify people's appearance through surgery, chemistry, or selective breeding. Part of his duties at Auschwitz was as camp doctor. That didn't mean he helped people. Rather, he performed experimental surgery on select groups of people, all without anesthetic. Most died. Mengele also took part in the selections, where incoming prisoners, mostly the Jews of occupied Europe, were chosen for immediate death in the gas chambers or work in the camp. Mengele actually volunteered for this work. At times, he also dropped the gas pellets into the gas chambers, killing more than 1,000 people at a time. After the war, Mengele, aided by a rat line of sympathizers and conservative members of the Catholic Church, escaped to South America, eventually to Brazil. He was hunted for years, but never caught. He was thought to be alive into the 1980s, but information came out in 1986 which led investigators to a grave where his bones and teeth were found. He had had a stroke in 1979 while swimming and drowned. Adolf Eichmann. Eichmann is perhaps the most well-known Nazi war criminal who escaped justice after WWII. Tasked with planning the logistics of the Holocaust by Heinrich Himmler, Eichmann directed trains, people, equipment, and much else to and from the death camps. He escaped from a POW camp, worked on a German farm for a time, then escaped to Argentina, where many Nazis and pro-Nazi German immigrants had settled. He worked under the name Ricardo Clement in Argentina for years, before the Israeli intelligence organization, the Mossad, kidnapped him and brought him to Israel to stand trial in 1961. His trial was, and still is, considered the trial of the 20th century. Eichmann is the only person ever executed by the State of Israel. Erich Priebke. Priebke was the commanding officer of an SS unit that had been charged with carrying out reprisals for attacks on German soldiers, and on March 24, 1944, rounded up 335 Italian men and led them into the Ardeatine caves. There, each one was forced to kneel and shot in the back of the head. This was done in rows, and the succeeding victims were brought in and forced to kneel among those already dead because of lack of space. The Allies knew who was responsible for the massacre. Priebke was held in a British prison camp, but he escaped with the aid of the British bishop in Rome, August Hudel, who was discovered years later to have run one of the so-called rat lines to Argentina, helping Nazis escape justice. Given a new identity as Otto Popp, Priebke lived peacefully in Argentina for over 50 years, despite rumors of his being involved in war crimes. In 1994, in one of his most famous interviews, ABC newsman Sam Donaldson confronted Priebke in Argentina. Convinced that he was safe, and perhaps proud of his wartime efforts, Priebke admitted his participation in the massacre, and was eventually extradited to Italy. After a long, highly politicized trial and appeal that involved rioting by Italian fascists and counter-demonstrators, Priebke only served 5 years. Priebke appealed that, and the appellate court gave him life in prison instead. He died in 2013, at 100, accepting that he was there and gave the commands to kill, but that he was only following orders. Otto Skorzeny, Hitler's commando. Otto Skorzeny was famous for having rescued Mussolini from an isolated mountaintop after being overthrown in 1943. In late 1944, troops under Skorzeny's command posed as American soldiers during the Battle of the Bulge, sowing panic behind U.S. lines. Misinformation spread by Skorzeny led General Eisenhower to go into hiding for a time during the battle, as it was believed that the German commando had targeted him for assassination. After the war, Skorzeny escaped from prison in 1948 with the aid of his former SS comrades who posed as American military police. After 3 years on the run, including being spotted in a Paris cafe in 1950, Skorzeny finally made it to Spain, having been given a diplomatic passport by that then-fascist country. Over the following decades, Skorzeny's name popped up in Egypt, where he helped that military government stay in power. He also helped train members of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, in their fight against Israel. One of the men he trained was future PLO leader Yasser Arafat. He was also rumored to have aided the Perón dictatorship in Argentina. Rumors constantly circulated that Skorzeny was one of the key figures of the secret organization Die Spinne, the Spider, which helped SS men escape justice. He gave several interviews from his home in Spain, which you can see on YouTube. He died in bed in 1975. Hermann Göring. Hermann Göring, head of the German Air Force during World War II and who played a major role in the Holocaust, was a whale, both figuratively and literally. He was also a morphine addict and Hitler's designated successor until the very end of the war, when he offered Germany's surrender to the Allies without Hitler's approval, infuriating Hitler, and therefore Hitler stripped him of all of his titles and put a death sentence on him. Göring was placed under house arrest by the SS, but was freed by a passing Luftwaffe unit. He made his way to the U.S. Army front line in the hopes of surrendering to them instead of being captured by the Soviet Army. He was taken into custody by elements of the 36th Infantry Division of the U.S. Army. At the Nuremberg trials, he was sentenced to death by hanging. Before that happened, however, Göring was found dead in his cell, suicide by cyanide. One American guard was posthumously accused of having given Göring the pills in trade for his watch. Another claimed to have given Göring a pen from his personal property, which contained medicine, which the guard denied having known. It's never been conclusively proven where Göring got the cyanide from, or whether he had had it all along. Franz Stangl. Franz Stangl, an Austrian-born SS officer, was the man who commanded the Treblinka extermination camp for the longest time. Before that, he had been involved in other roles in the final solution, as the Nazis called it, the Holocaust. More people were killed at Treblinka in a shorter time than any other camp, more than 900,000 in just over 2 years. Unlike Auschwitz, Treblinka did not put people to work, other than to dispose of bodies. It just killed them. Stangl was in command for most of it. After the war, Stangl, like many other infamous Nazi war criminals, escaped to Syria, home to an anti-Semitic fascist regime. Stangl, like Priebke and other Nazis, escaped with the aid of Bishop Hudel and his Ratline. Stangl and his family lived in Syria for 3 years, before moving to Brazil, under his own name. Then he got a job at the Volkswagen plant in a southern Brazilian city, where he worked until 1967. No one has ever explained how this mass murderer, who had actually registered with the Austrian consulate in nearby Sao Paulo, was not brought to justice until famed Nazi hunter and Holocaust survivor Simon Wiesenthal brought it to the world's attention in 1961. 6 years of diplomatic nonsense stalled his arrest and extradition. In 1990, Stangl was put on trial in Germany and given a life sentence. He died of a heart attack in prison in 1972. Martin Bormann. Martin Bormann became Hitler's right-hand man during the war. Serving as the chief of the Reich's chancellery, Bormann controlled access to Hitler and was involved in many aspects of life in Germany. Bormann was in the bunker with Hitler almost until the end. Then he disappeared. Nothing. No trace. For decades, historians and Nazi hunters looked for him, following one lead after another, all of them leading to nowhere. The German government had offered a reward for Bormann in 1964, almost 20 years after the war ended. Occasionally, a grainy picture would appear in a supermarket tabloid with a headline something like this: Hitler aide Bormann pictured on the Riviera, or Fourth Reich being established in Amazon by Martin Bormann. Even after his final whereabouts had been established, there was a best-selling book asserting that Bormann had been a Soviet spy throughout the war. In 1972, remains were found in Berlin during excavation near a train station in West Berlin. Dental records pointed to the remains being Bormann's, but the evidence was not conclusive. However, in 1998, DNA sampling of Bormann family members conclusively proved that the remains were Bormann's and that he likely committed suicide by cyanide poisoning, unable to escape Berlin. What do you think? Are there still Nazi war criminals alive out there? Please leave a comment down below about your thoughts, and don't forget to like today's video.